I agree that people that have guns should be trained and know how to use them and keep them safe. But to say that we shouldn't have guns because some are dangerous is like saying nobody should drive a car. Because at 75, 80 miles an hour going through the boulder, that would cause a whole lot of trouble too. So it's the person using the gun, it's the person driving the car. Those are what we have to watch out for. A gun just laying there doesn't hurt anybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Polly Christensen.
Hi, my name is Polly Christensen, Mayor and fellow City Council members. I live at 410 Judson in Longmont. I'm here to speak on gun violence prevention ordinance for Longmont. I know from your agenda that you have discussed this in executive sessions for legal advice, and prudence is a very good thing. However, so far that I know, the only member of council who has stood up for an ordinance publicly has been Mayor Peck. The people of Longmont have the right to freedom from fear. We have the right to go to the movies without being murdered. That has happened in Colorado. We have the right to go grocery shopping without being murdered. That has happened in Colorado. We have the right to go to the doctor without being murdered. That has happened in Colorado. We have the right to go to church, synagogue, or temple without being murdered. That has happened in this country. On September 26th, on Main Street in Longmont, Colorado, a man tried to grab a woman off the street. He got out and started waving around and threatening to shoot people, and then shot his gun into the air. If City Council can ban smoking from downtown, City Council can ban guns from downtown. And mostly, our children deserve to go to school and have the right to go to school without being murdered. They deserve to not even have to think about it. After the Supreme Court in June destroyed New York City's 100-year-old law to regulate itself and its gun laws, the towns of Superior, Louisville, Lafayette, and the Boulder County Commissioners passed gun violence laws in July and September. Why does Longmont lack the courage to do the same, to stand up to this outrageous misinterpretation by the Supreme Court of the Constitution? You were elected to represent the people of Longmont, to serve and protect. Have the courage to do the right thing and back this gun violence prevention ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. Ryan Forbes.
Ryan Forbes, 303 Coffin. Last time I was here, a lot of people were talking about pedestrian safety. And as someone who doesn't own a car and lives in downtown Longmont, I have a lot to say about the issue. And a lot of people recommended having more police and changing the speed limit. I don't think either of those would resolve the issue. The main issue that I see is the buttons on the crosswalks are actually the biggest issue, because for one, they're not consistent. A lot of them don't work. A lot of them, you hit them, the lights change, and then on the pedestrian light doesn't change, and you don't know if it's because it doesn't work, or it's because the lights aren't synced right, or it's because the turn signal's on for the car. And I've seen many times, and I've done this myself, where I've been sitting there waiting for it to go, and then someone just walks right into the traffic. And in Denver, they don't have lights like they don't have buttons on the crosswalks. The lights are synced for the pedestrians to cross, so there's always time for people to cross across the street. So they do not need to have buttons on there, and people do not need to hit a button for there to be time to actually make it across the street. Whereas like on 5th and Main, if you don't hit the button, then you can't get across the street even when the lights change directions. So that would be the biggest thing, is to actually change it for pedestrians, and also if the lights change so that when they change from one direction to the other, it would let the pedestrian know, because especially like winter is coming, and if you're out walking in the snow and the ice, you want to get across the street as soon as possible. And even in the summertime, and you've got grocery, and you're carrying groceries, you want to try and move and get out of there. Whereas in a car, it's not as big of an emergency, but I know there is traffic. But it's trying to find that balance, and I think that is the biggest thing that would help. And one other note, since I was here and on the topic tonight, the United States incarcerates more of its population than any other country, and it has one of the worst gun violence problems than any other country. So prosecution does not help gun violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Stan Gelb?
Good evening. I'm Stan Gelb from Longmont, 2226 Sherman Street. There's one question I'm asking you all to answer. What will it take? Gunshot deaths in America are now over 38,000 every year. That's 105 gunshot deaths every day. Every day. Gunshots are now the #1 cause of death for children aged 19 and under. What will it take for Longmont City Council to take action to minimize these ongoing terrible tragedies? Are you waiting for a mass shooting here in Longmont? Are you waiting for a mass shooting at a Longmont school? Are you waiting for a mass shooting at a Longmont school that leaves dozens of children dead and hundreds of children scarred for life? What are you waiting for? When the next mass shooting occurs, will you be able to look in the mirror while admitting that you chose to do nothing that might have prevented the shooting and the deaths of all those children? What will it take? Will you let excuses and alibis stop life-saving measures? Or will you choose meaningful actions? Rock star Neil Young, a half a century ago, sang, "What if you knew her and found her dead on the ground?" What will it take? Contrary to what some dishonest politicians are now saying, all these gunshot deaths are not the price of freedom. Many gunshot deaths are the result of elected officials stalling on critical legislation. I urge you, I plead with you, take action now in honor and remembrance of all the lives already lost and to save future lives. What will it take? Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Stan. Strider Benston?
I'm a little slow. Strider Benston, 951 West 17th. You know what, with my health, transportation, poverty, communications, and technology problems, it's hard to get here, but hey, you do what you can. By the way, it was my good friend Tony who got killed on 3rd Avenue, and people have known for decades that traffic is too fast for a major street that's winding and narrow, but I don't know what'll ever get done. On the gun thing, 2 things. Number one, it's got to be geographical to have any meaning. Boulder, Superior, others have gun laws and people bring the guns in. Like they sometimes did on 6th and Main to front us off across the street. But on the other side, the reason we're not in a civil war right now with hundreds of thousands dead is because Stuart Rhodes and his people who led the insurrection were afraid of their guns being confiscated when they came into Washington, because they do have a law banning guns, and they were going to confiscate, and they confiscated a number of guns, but most of them left their AR-15s in hotel rooms across the river, and they were going to bring them after they secured the Capitol to destroy the government. And if they'd have had those hundreds or thousands of AR-15s, I mean, we'd be in a civil war right now with maybe millions dead. That has been the policy of the underside of the Republican Party for the last 50 or 60 years. But I don't need to go into that except to point out that just today, they're trying to overthrow the right to vote in this country. The Supreme Court has taken over the legislature after they have, you have minority rule in the Congress, especially in the Senate, so nothing ever gets done, almost nothing. And so the Supreme Court has become the Congress, and they're passing laws whole cloth. They overthrew Roe v. Wade. That was not in the legislation. I mean, in the court case that came up, Dobbs had nothing. It said 15 weeks. Well, that's bad, but it's sane, and you could debate that. But no, they changed it into overthrowing Roe. And at this point, guns everywhere is intended to be a civil war. We better wake up and fight and maintain the right to vote.
Thank you, Strider. So that ends public invited to be heard. Is there anyone? Oh, I'm sorry, Lance. How could I miss you? The most important guy in the room.
There you go. My name is Lance Whitaker. I live at 1750 Collier. I've lived in Longmont for 40 years. I'm a voting libertarian. Long live the porcupine. Today is National Cinnamon Bun Day. If that doesn't fit in your diet, it is also National Eat Fruit at Work Day. On that subject, I would like to also say that I've been traveling around Southmore Park lately looking at properties for real estate purposes, and have noticed that quite a few trees have been missing from the area near the flood area. And I would like to impose that the city might want to look into maybe planting some fruit trees in that area while we have the opportunity. Fruit trees bring a lot of good things to the city, so I would hope that maybe we can plant some fruit trees along that path there, where we've lost so many trees before the native weed tree known as the ash tree comes back in full force. So again, maybe we can do the community a little bit of good and plant some fruit. You guys all have a good day, and I thank you for all your work and your years. Have a good day.
Thank you, Lance. I apologize for almost forgetting you.
It's all right. You have a good day.
You too. Is there anyone else in the audience that would care to come up for public invited to be heard? Seeing no one, I will close public invited to be heard. Do we have any special reports or presentations? I guess not.
No, Mayor.
We do have a study session item next, which is the 2023 budget discussion and second public hearing. So Teresa Malloy is coming down for that presentation.
Good evening, Mayor Peck and City Council. Teresa Malloy, Budget Manager. We have 3 topics for you this evening. I'm going to go through very briefly the changes since we first presented the budget to you in August. And then we did advertise for a second public hearing. And then we'll need final direction from you tonight so that we can bring back the associated ordinances for next week. So the overview of changes, I'm going to go through them fund by fund. So general fund, we have both reductions and additions. Reductions of property tax in the amount of $186,130. That is due to the preliminary assessed valuations that we received after we presented the proposed budget to you. And then, as Jim had mentioned last week, we have a reduction in the ongoing amount of take-home, for the take-home vehicle for $283,127. And then on the other side, we've got $64,000 and almost $64,500 of ongoing additions for pay plan corrections and ongoing addition of $32,500 for Longmont Public Media, which does bring Longmont Public Media up to the 50% of the budgeted cable franchise. And the $120,000 one time. So it's these two, the 32.5 ongoing, 120,000 one time. That brings us up to that 50%. And then again, a change for the take-home vehicles. Only this time it is so we reduce the ongoing, but we're adding one time in the amount of $254,809. So the overall general fund reduction has both a decrease in revised revenues and an increase in revised expenses. So our revenues are now at $104.65 million and expenses at $109.89 million. Changes also in the electric and broadband fund, a reduction of $2.4 million in purchase power, and that is really being driven by the proposed budget included a wholesale purchase power increase from PRPA of 6.1%. But as Brian has mentioned to you previously, they're now only looking at a 5% PRPA purchase power increase. So that results in the reduction of $2.4 million in the purchase power expense. And then additions to the electric and broadband fund, some additional pay plan corrections, and for the electric utility, an increase in the expense for the franchise equivalency of $153,000. And this is really, again, being driven by the proposed pay plan. The franchise expense in the electric utility was based on no rate increase from PRPA, and this is including that 5% wholesale energy PRPA rate increase, because we want to make sure that we have the franchise equivalency budgeted at the rate that they will actually be paying for 23. And so these combined changes results only in an expense change in the electric and broadband fund, bringing the expenses up down, actually. This is a decrease due to that $2.4 million purchase power. So overall, it's about a $1.6 million decrease. So our revised expenses are $112.374 million. A very minor change in the Downtown Development Authority Debt Service Fund, $8. So the debt service transfer from the debt service fund to the art and entertainment fund was under budgeted by $8. And then, as we have mentioned, we will be bringing an ordinance to create a new fund, the Attainable Housing Fund, and you will see that ordinance next week, along with all the other budget ordinances. And so we need to then add the revenue from the general fund of $950,000 and the expense of $950,000 in what will be the new Attainable Housing Fund. And the final change is for the Public Safety Fund. Again, the take-home vehicles in the Public Safety Fund, one-time addition of $50,800, bringing that budget to $18.45 million. And one more slide on our changes. So this is the total budget now, revised revenues in total, all funds, $380,875,706, and revised expenses of $413,90,816. So that is the changes I wanted to highlight with you this evening. In your packet is attachment Q, which also goes through these very same changes and shows you what was our proposed, how did it change, and what is the new revised budget.
And to be clear for the community, wanted to point out the ongoing revenue and the ongoing expenses are balanced. The difference you're seeing is the utilization of one-time funds to come to that 413 that we have when we talk about the capital funds in here. So I wanted to make sure everyone knew it's balanced on the ongoing operating revenues and expenditures. Just you're seeing the difference on the one-time funds.
And that is mostly for CIP. Okay, so
Do we have any questions at this point from counselors? You know, Harold, to the point that we made last week on that difference that the last slide, I think that an explanation of this would have been good on this slide. The difference, the explanation about ongoing and one-time funds, because it does look like we're at a deficit. And that's hard to explain.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to come in and say this. And Teresa, I don't know if you can add any more to this to give some clarity.
And I was just going to say, I will certainly add some additional information before we post it on the website with the rest of our budget information.
Thank you. And Councilor Waters.
Thanks, Mayor Peck. We just spent another minute on this. When we, in the earlier budget presentations, I was going to ask you to go back to the first slides where we started to see the deficit or the difference, but that's okay. No, you can just leave it right there.
Okay.
Because they all roll up into this last slide. In one of the early presentations that Jim made, we were talking about one-time expenditures of around 4.9 million, as I recall.
In the general fund.
Two questions then. Kind of roll up from the general fund to CIP to, other funds, how we get to a $33 million deficit, or difference, not deficit, in ongoing and one-time expenditures. Because that's just gets real confusing. It's hard to look at that and not think of a deficit, right? And then how does that get reconciled in 2024? I mean, this is going to end up being a $700 million budget by the time we're finished next year with the carryovers and whatnot. But as an accounting need or accounting on an accounting basis, how do we get to a balanced budget in 2023, at the end of 2023, when it looks like we have this kind of deficit going in?
Mayor Peck, members of council, I'm Jim Golden, Chief Financial Officer. In short, we're balanced because the difference between these two numbers is fund balance. So that is considered a revenue in our budgeting process. We don't consider it in a revenue as we show it, because it's not a revenue coming in, but it's a source of revenue that we use to balance our budget. And it is, as early on in the process, it's been a long 4 or 5
Yeah.
weeks, right? If I take you back to about 4 weeks ago, we did take you through fund by fund.
Yeah.
And we did show you that there were individual funds that had expenses that were exceeding their revenues, and the difference was going to be covered by fund balance. In most cases, that was all related to one-time type expense. In all cases, it was one-time expenses.
And I just, let me go back. This will end up approving appropriations during the year. It's our charter, it's the requirement under our charter, that we do this on, I guess, on an accrual basis,
This is a cash basis.
cash basis, and then it rolls year over year, right? So we've got money in the bank or in an account that will show up when we make those appropriations in 2023 that begin to resolve this, what appears to be
Right,
deficit.
that difference is sitting in our accounts currently, or will in some cases accumulate over the next 3 months, and they'll be available to.
Yeah, I just
to
think
fund
that's,
that.
that's what people need to understand because of the way it appears in terms of going in with a deficit, so, thanks.
And we've talked about this before, that, our budget outside of the public improvement fund, that's the only thing where we can fund a project and it just stays with it.
Yeah,
So when we have the capital funds, that's why you see these big rollovers, because as we've had to budget for them, CIS is a good example. We budgeted a lot to get to the point, but then you're always rolling it over until you have enough money to issue the bid.
and is that not on accrual is not that's not the right term? Because that we accrue over years, sufficient dollars to then to pull the trigger on, a bunch of capital projects?
Well, Mayor, members of council, I wouldn't say that's an accrual in the sense of an accounting use of the term, but they are building up in the sense of an accrual, yes.
As a practical matter.
Right,
yeah.
but from a cash versus accrual basis, the budget's all on a cash basis,
Thanks.
so.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, Councilor Hidalgo-Thering.
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a quick clarification question. So the rollover amounts, are they reflected on these revised revenues? So just money that was carried over from last year, or?
Mayor Peck, members of council, they're in the revised, these revised revenues do not include those amounts because we do not count those as revenue. They are fund balance. And so when we're saying we have a balanced budget, it's using revenues and it's using savings or leftover money from the previous year, fund balance, that we're not showing here as a revenue, because that's not a revenue in the next year.
Yeah.
But it is available funds. I mean, if you don't spend them this way, then they just build up forever, right? And you can never touch them. So you got to be able to draw down from your reserve, from your fund balance, and use them for one-time type expenses. So that's what we're doing in this budgeting process.
Okay, and so that was more for clarification, so that also helps explain that we're not in a deficit. There is other money there. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I think this is essentially the same question, but why would we not simply show expected fund balance withdrawals as a third bullet here? Because then everybody could see that the money spent would equal the money available to spend.
That's how Teresa's gonna change it.
I see.
We can do that. I
Okay.
mean, in the ordinance, we're not going to show that as a source. But for a presentation like this, we will show revenues, expenses, and we can show fund balance. You don't appropriate that, though.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
And so, as I mentioned, we did advertise for a second public hearing, so I'll let you hold your public hearing.
Okay. We would like to open the public hearing on this 2023 budget on the capital improvement CIP. Is there anybody in the public that would like to address council on the budget? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing.
And then Mayor and Council, final thing we need from you this evening is just final direction on these 4 items: the budget, the CIP, the pay plan, and our financial policies, because each one of those we will have to bring back in either an ordinance or a resolution format.
Go ahead, ask. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I was just wondering if we can move the package in one, or do we need to take them one by one?
You can move it in one and just direct us to bring it. You all will have the ability to vote on it.
Each one separately.
Each one, and you're to 2 readings, so yeah.
All right, thank you. With that direction, I move that staff bring forward the 2023 budget, the 2023-2027 capital improvement program, the 2023 pay plan, and 2023 financial policies.
So that was moved by Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez, seconded by Councilor Waters. Councilor Hidalgo-Ferring, we're open for discussion. Do you?
I do. And this question might be more directed towards Harold or, or Jim. So, we heard tonight from a resident from the library board, he's sitting in the audience, looking at what the impact would be to, pull aside, that's the suggestion of looking at our capital for potentially expanding our library needs, looking at that. I mean, because, our social infrastructure, our parks, our libraries, our museum, museum does bring in an income, but our parks and library do not bring in that revenue. So it's really dependent on us to adequately fund those. So, one question is, looking at the suggestion made, what kind of impact would that have on our budget? Is that something that is feasible to look at? If not, when do we expect to hear, about the feasibility study and making the necessary appropriations or funding mechanism for that down the line? Or when are we expecting to hear? So it's a 3 question. Or I'll let you answer the first 2 and then I'll throw in the third.
Well, go ahead and go with the third, and then, because
When are we expecting to hear more about the potential voting quality of life tax?
whatever we're gonna name it.
Whatever we're gonna name it.
So a few things. I think if you made an adjustment, we would have to make corresponding adjustments into the specific budget line items to the whole balancing component and how we do it. So we would have to change things and unfund things to do that. Second to that component is, I think the one thing that we look at is, when the new director comes in, is working through them and understanding what they want to do and really evaluating what opportunities we have, and also looking for other sources of revenue to accomplish that. I know in the interview process, and you heard me talk about it a little bit, one of the individuals talked about how they funded these remote access, I call them remote libraries, for a different perspective, where they really get into various neighborhoods within the community. And they were aware of different grants and that fund that. I know that Jeff's been looking at some potential funding sources for that already to move it. So, we never ask staff to stop looking and seeing what's there. And then once we can define it, then we go back and try to figure out, here's how we accomplish that. We've done that with you all on some things that have come up, especially on capital projects. You've seen us when we've run into big projects and we have to start unfunding and funding depending on what we're doing. I think the biggest component on this is really looking at, again, for lack of a better name, the quality of life component. And I think we said we were going to bring that in November, Sandy. To let you know where we are, they finished that. I know Jim was telling me today, I think he's asked Becky to make an adjustment on the interest rates in terms of the capital expenses. I think we plugged in 4.5%, and we think based on where the current interest market's running, we probably need a model at 5.5%. And we're going to have all of those projects listed. We're also going to have those listed with the corresponding mill levy increases. We're going to bring that back to council in November where you see it all. You see all the needs. And then we're gonna work you all through that to go, as you're looking at this, what do you think and what would you put forward? And then we're gonna move then from that conversation into a community involvement process, so that at the beginning of the early in the year, first quarter, we're refining that to determine whether what council wants to do in terms of potentially going out for an election to fund whatever it is that is decided upon at that time.
Okay, and then as grants or even other opportunities arise, or maybe the new director says, hey, you know, we really need this piece, or this is something critical that we need to fund. You know, as, you know, even though we've passed this budget, you know, what is the likelihood of being able to go in and adjust allocations to support, or looking at those grant opportunities to fund those pieces? You've said that
Yeah, the
we're,
grant opportunities, you
are
know,
always
obviously we can
there.
move on it. I think it depends on what it is and what the expense is in terms of what we can really do with the revenue sources that we have. You know, the big issue that I think that we all have to be cognizant of coming into next year is a compensation study. And that's where we did put money aside in my contingency based on when we see that compensation study come back. Are we gonna need additional funds? You know, at this point, we don't even know if that's gonna be enough money.
okay.
And so I think it really depends in terms of how we're moving forward, how we end the year, things like that.
Okay, okay, no, that's helpful. And I think really just if things are, you know, if grant opportunities come forward, or, you know, people are, you know, staff is getting creative and have this wonderful idea, you know, please share those with us. So the community knows, you know, the progress we are making, and that we just haven't put it, the library, in the back burner, that we are actively thinking about how we could make up the deficit that's continuing.
Yeah, and I know, you know, Jeff's been spending a lot of time, and I think, you know, Jeff has obviously, as he's worked in other areas in the recreation area, even seen kind of what he was done in the golf. I mean, I think he understands that capital piece and can really he brings a lot to the table on how to maybe accomplish things. I think the key for us when we're looking at this, and I say this because, you know, we've allocated some dollars to, you know, neighborhood impact work. And I think understanding how we can come together as an organization to collectively serve the neighborhoods, and so where we are, including the library, the museum, and many of these, and how do we get into neighborhoods also gives us other opportunities. And that's something that I know we've been talking about is, you know, how do we go out into the communities? Because the other thing that's as important as a facility in terms of what we're seeing, because we're seeing many of our neighborhoods don't necessarily have the ability to come in. And so how are we augmenting and expanding our operations to deliver services to everyone in the community? That positions us well for different grants that we're seeing. And there's a lot of money coming out in, you know, all of these federal programs, and that's where we're going to be scouring to figure it out. And then typically it's a match, but then Jim sent me something yesterday about the state doing something with the match. You sent an email about the state program.
Yeah, offering different matches for.
Yeah, so there's a state program to offer matches for the federal programs. And so I just think we've got to look at all of it. But
Got
in
it.
terms of saying, you know, set aside $500,000 today, back to your first question, we would have to go change a lot.
A lot, okay. Okay, great, thank you.
Seeing no one else in the queue for comments, we have a motion on the table. So we need to vote on the four options to give final direction, which are on the screen. So let's vote. As soon as I get my screen back. And that passes unanimously. Thank you, Teresa. Was that it for the budget presentation? Oh, okay. So now Dawn's here, we have the election ward boundary adjustment process. This is very interesting.
It is interesting, Mayor Peck. Thank you very much. Don Quintana, City Clerk. I have a brief presentation for you all. It doesn't vary much from what's already in the council communication, but we thought it'd be a good idea to just run through some details about redistricting for the public and just for our own, refresh our own memories. So what is redistricting? Redistricting is a tongue twister, and it is the process of drawing the lines of districts, or in our case, wards, from which public officials are elected. Through this process, people are obtain accurate and are equitably. We accurately and equitably allocate representation based on changes in population and racial diversity. Why are we doing this now? Basically because the charter requires it. According to Charter 2.6, we're required to look at our boundaries every 10 years. The last time we did this was in 2012, so here we are 10 years later. We've also seen the census be completed in 2020, and we have updated population information. Additionally, the state, as you all know, did their redistricting, and the counties earlier this year also, as you know, implemented their redistricting and updated even our own precincts. So now that all of that information has settled, it's our turn to take this process on. And as you'll see in one of the maps that we included in the packet, this is just population numbers, but the blue area is Ward 1, red area is Ward 3, and the yellow area is Ward 2. Our population numbers are not balanced in this graphic. So Ward 1 has 36,000 people and some more. Ward 2 has 34, almost 35,000, and Ward 3 just under 28,000. So not balanced. We did not pull the registered voter numbers for each ward. We are working on pulling those layers of information down, but we wanted to get some information from you all and see what you all think before we get too deep into this process. The parameters we have to follow are we must strive to keep an equal population in our wards. It does not have to be mathematically exact. That probably is not too easy to obtain, but as close as feasible. Maintain racial equality. No gerrymandering is the bullet point there. Wards should remain compact or as compact as possible in order to maintain balance in those population numbers. They should be contiguous. We should not have, a gap between two portions of a ward. We also will preserve boundaries of existing precincts. So our precincts that showed in our map, we would not draw a line through the middle of one of those. We will maintain those boundary lines. We also want to preserve communities of interest. And we will comply with local, state, and federal laws, of course. We would not draw lines to favor or disfavor a political party. And ideally, we would not change a seated elected official, move them out of their district. So we would hope not to do that. The goal of the process is to adopt a new ward map that is done by you all by ordinance. The way we see that kind of working in general terms is we go to the drawing board, create some maps, some options, take that out to the community, to council. We're looking for your feedback about how you would like that to run, but gather input on those options, go back to the drawing board, implement some revisions, and bring back final maps for comment and then for adoption. So somewhat of an iterative process, create some maps, get some input, fix the maps, more input, however many times that takes. Our charter indicates that we must adopt these boundaries 120 days prior to election. So our deadline, if these are to apply in our 2023 election, is July 10th, 2023. So you'll see that the timeline we've developed drives us towards there. That's an assumption that the goal for you all is that it would be in place for the 2023 election since it is a council election. And we have started pulling some information together. We've got some maps we're playing with and starting to look at how this data comes together. Nothing worthy of anybody else's eyes quite yet. And really the big question is, what kind of community engagement, what kind of community involvement would you like to see? And I'll just jump forward one. I threw in the community involvement pyramid just to sort of refresh our memories what that looks like. I believe we'll have a lot of informing to do. We have a lot of information to share with people about this process. But likely we would probably want to involve people quite heavily. You all are the decision makers, so they don't quite make it to the tip of the pyramid in this one, but real tight involvement with the community because these are their ward maps, right? So I'll just go back. In the council communication, we laid out some ideas for how we might engage the community. We've started reaching out to NGLA. When do you have meetings? We've started asking some questions and doing some legwork, but haven't put in a tight timeline yet. Again, we wanted to get your feedback first. Some of our ideas are to put this out on Engage Longmont so people can engage, provide feedback all throughout the process. Hold public meetings, of course, virtual and in person, where people can see the maps and provide some feedback. Possibly create a video that someone could watch that wasn't able to attend virtually or in public. Have a dedicated web page, use our social media outlets, all of the tools that the city has at our hand, we would envision we would use for this process. Just some ideas, open to others. We looked at that guy. Here's our possible timeline, again, striving towards July 10, 2023. Right now, working on analyzing data and creating those draft maps or options for people to look at, then take those out for comment, get some feedback on those draft maps that we have. November through January, maybe February. February, come back to our team, our data team, and look at the input that we've received and see if we can refine those maps and those options. Maybe to 2 or 3. Not sure what the right answer there is. And then take that back out for final comment and then bring it back to you all for final adoption, including all the final comment on our final options. And then that's an ordinance would have to go to first and second reading, so of course a public hearing. Those would happen in June of 2023, and then we'd be in good shape for July 10. So our questions are, how would council like to be involved, really, in the big picture, and at what points along the path would you like to be involved? Would you like to see draft maps before we go anywhere, talk to the public, or would you like us to just get that process going and then keep you informed, or what does that look like for you? What kind of information and involvement would you like? What other community involvement would you like us to do that we haven't thought of? And then do you have feedback about that timeline? Is July 10, 2023 the right goal? So I will stop talking and let you all talk.
Any comments, Councilor Martin?
Thank you, Mayor Peck. I actually, because, I don't think that the staff has any motivation to, achieve a particular outcome as a partisan legislature would have. So I don't really anticipate that there will be any issues with the ward maps that the staff comes up with. Nevertheless, I think it might be prudent to accelerate that timeline a little bit, just in case there is some issue or a resident raises an issue that is substantive with the ward maps, so that there would be time to revise without bumping us right up against the deadline. I don't know whether that's possible, but I would like to float the suggestion.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilor Yarbrough.
Thank you, Mayor Peck. So for me, this would be my first time going through this process. I think probably all of us, right?
Yeah.
All of us.
10 years ago. Okay, so for me, I think it is important for me to be involved. Well, because when the community come to us or come to me and ask these questions, where we are, I think it's very important for me to know where we are in the process and what does that look like. So for me personally, I would like to be a part of that, knowing what it looks like now, as we moving forward, and it's not to question staff on, what they're analyzing. It's just so that I can be informed when they're asking us these questions. So that's the way I look at it, and maybe that's the wrong way. And I agree with Councilor Martin too, but I also know no one knows until you get in the middle of it how long this would take, what's the process, as well. So yeah, for me, I would love to know, like, see while you analyzing where we are, how far are we going. So when we're out in the community and people are asking us these questions and thinking that we're going to separate these wards and split them open and, and things like that, I think I'd like to be confident in knowing what I'm talking about, or just say I don't know, like sometimes I do. But that's okay too, right? But so yeah, for me, I just think I would like to be a part of that, and so that I can understand a little bit better as we go through it, if that's okay.
Councilor Waters.
Thanks, Mayor Peck. So there's going to be a balance, I think, between keeping us informed enough to be conversant and, be able to answer questions, and getting us involved in ways that politicize this process, because somebody has some, interest that it would be hard to understand from tonight, from my perspective. For me, I'll just be paying close attention to whatever that balance is, right? The worst thing, and I was quoted in the paper on this, I think the worst thing we could do is do anything that would make this look politicized, like redistricting does on the state or congressional level. It's nonpartisan. It's just numbers, with the focus to communities of interest and racial balance or equity balance, which I think are as important as communities of interest or other factors. So just be real. I'm just saying. The next time you would hear from me is if it looked to me like it was being politicized. Otherwise, I'll learn and answer questions if I can.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Rodriguez.
Thank you very much, Mayor Peck. So at Coffee with Council, I was approached by a member of the community who is actually interested in how we divvy up wards and how this generally works. And my answer, so please correct me if I'm wrong, our 3 ward seats and 3 at-large seats are dictated by the charter.
That is correct.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so any changes to that particular system would have to be a charter amendment, which would have to go through the voting process and all of that, correct? Okay, so I think it is therefore a very good idea that we have a fairly robust education and outreach to the community, as this gentleman was very concerned about the equity of having at-large seats and ward seats. And so I definitely would like it to be a very robust community outreach before it ever comes to City Council. And I think that echoes some of the concerns that Councilmember Waters just made, in that, I don't think we want to be seen as holding some sort of heavy hand over the process. And so that's, kind of my opinion on the subject. I think that the outline presented as far as how you would interact with the community and the different forums and things like that, it all sounds great. The more outreach, the better.
Right.
So, I don't have anything specifically off top of mind that sticks out as something novel that you haven't already considered. And as far as the timeline, I think I would tend to agree with Councilmember Martin, is that giving yourself a little bit more fudge time would probably be good, as far as in case anything unforeseen pops up in the community outreach process. So, thank you.
Thank you for fudge time. That's my term too.
Councilor Hidalgo Faring.
Thank you, Mayor. So, as far as my involvement, I would like to know when community meetings are happening. I'd like to be a part of the conversation, knowing what's being said. I think, when we hear it, from, okay, just everybody's interpretation and a list of, just what were some key comments. It's very different than actually being in the conversation with them. So as things start rolling out, I'd love to jump in on a Zoom or attend a community forum here and there to kind of get a sense of what are some of the comments, directly from the person. In that regard. The other thing I was going to mention was, as well as what Councilmember Martin had commented, is that the timeline is really giving us that time before we finalize anything to make adjustments based on community feedback. And yeah, I mean, I look at my ward, it's relatively small, and a small number of Latinx population.
Right.
I mean, it's not really balanced as it is right now, and it is because it's, not much growth is happening
Right.
north and west of my ward. So, and all the growth seems to be happening south and to the east. So yeah, providing that balance, I think, will really help, council members in the future as well to make sure they're being able to reach constituents, so.
Thank you.
So,
oh, go ahead.
okay. Let me just go through this too. So I'm going to put number 1 and number 2 together. I definitely think that council should be involved in the process, in the community involvement. But what I think worked in the past is to have the kind of the community cafe thing where we can break up into groups and discuss it, because sometimes we get more knowledge from each other talking about it and more questions. And Councilor Martin's timeline, I agree with that as well. But my question is, and I do want the draft before we go out for community input. Because this is a 10-year process, is the draft going to include the proposed developments that are going to be developed within the next 5 or 6 years?
Do we allow for growth is how I understand your question.
Yes, and the maps now that you just showed us at the beginning, did that include, for example, the Martin development out by Harvest Acres, or?
No, those numbers were based on 2020 census data, so not even current to our population is bigger than what is on those maps right now. So, I mean, we would go off of 2020 census data, and we need to, this is one of our questions, do we allow for growth for our consultant? That is one of the questions on our list.
We have to. So just out of curiosity then, for this upcoming election, what ward is that development in? Out there by Harvest Junction where Martin Road goes?
Oh, yeah, it's Ward 2.
Oh, it is Ward 2. Okay. Just curious.
The whole south,
Okay.
the south side.
Okay. That's it for me.
Very good, so if
So what I was
go
gonna,
ahead.
I was actually going to, so I was thinking through this, and I was trying to figure out how, yeah, I need help. I was trying to I got it now, yeah. I was trying to figure out how, this will be the 3rd time I will have gone through this exercise.
Not here.
Second time here. So we went through it right when I started here. Some slight difference in this. This time we decided to use a consultant. Last time we didn't, and that was something that we've talked about. One of the things that, when I've been hiring an organization and I've seen this done, and I suggested it to Dawn, they're meeting with a consultant on Friday, but I think the first thing in terms of the process and understanding it is probably bringing the consultant in to talk to you all with a little more depth about the process and what that looks like. That's really agnostic to the maps, and it's more about what we have to look at, because the reality is this is a huge data exercise in terms of what you're looking at, with a lot of oversight, and that can include Department of Justice involvement if it's different, although we're seeing some interesting things from the Supreme Court. But there are a number of potential landmines that we have to watch out for as we're going through this. And so I think, based on what I've heard, I think maybe one of the first steps I would recommend is we bring the consultant in. And they can just go, here's what cities have to look at, here's what you have to do, to give you a flavor of what we're going to go through, because it's not as simple as going, we want the line moved here. It's a balancing of population, it's a balancing of sub-demographics in this, and so there's a fair amount of work that goes into it. So based on what I've heard, I think that may be something that we consider, is bringing the consultant in to go, here's the world, and really work you through all the legal parameters to answer the questions that you may all get from your constituents. If that's something council's amenable to, we can talk to them on Friday.
Is there anyone on council that wants to differ from that, than having the consultant first? Looks like you have your direction in that.
Yep.
We like that.
Very good. And a more aggressive timeline, and involved and informed all the way along.
Yes.
Very good. I don't have anything else for you this evening unless you all have something else.
There's 7 more slides.
Yeah.
Empty slides. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Now we're at the part of the agenda for mayor and council comments. Do we have any comments from the councilors? Seeing none. City manager?
I actually have comments tonight.
Yay.
So one, I know there was a question about a timeline on the Vision Zero. I'll have that for council at the next meeting. There was also a question in terms of the contract on the bus. That contract has been drafted. It's actually in VIA, the bus for the Housing Authority for the, that contract has been drafted, and it is in VIA's hands right now, and they're reviewing it. And I have communicated that, we've communicated that with the Housing Authority folks, so those are two things. Yes. And Arlene was at a community meeting I was at yesterday. But I know those are two questions that you had, and I wanted to answer those tonight.
Great. Thank you. City attorney comments?
No comments, Mayor.
Thank you. Can I have a motion to adjourn? So it's been moved by Councilor Martin, seconded by Councilor Waters, that we adjourn. All those in favor, just say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.